Shortly after President Abraham Lincoln emancipated and proclaimed enslaved people in rebellious states to be free, all enslaved people faced a choice: remain in bondage and wait for the Union Army to liberate them, or escape to freedom for themselves. At the cotton plantation in Louisiana, Peter works and lives with his wife Dodie Ann, and kids Betsy and Cyprian. After learning that he has been sold to a new slave master in Clinton, he spends the last moments with his family, praying to God to keep them safe. The group of white men comes and forcefully drags him out of his house. Peter tries to fight back, yelling and struggling against their hold, but not until the man aims his gun at Dodie Ann and instantly makes him stop. Peter and a bunch of other slaves are loaded on the carriage and transported in cages to their new master. One of the handlers describes him as the best blacksmith, and through the bars, Peter promises his children one day he'll come back for them as they try to run after him in tears. They travel a while before arriving at the Confederate Army Railroad construction sites as the new workplace. The heads of the slaves that try to disobey the white master are lined up at the entrance to shout out loud the message to the rest. The conditions here are more inhumane than on cotton plantations. Peter and some slaves are assigned to lift heavy loads under the melting sunshine to build the railway. This hard work is monitored and supervised by armored white guards who would not hesitate to use their firearms against any disobedient slaves. They are chained in the evening after work and sleep like dogs in the cages. The white master discriminates against them and whips them whenever he feels it pleases him. To justify these actions, they quote some verses from the Bible. One slave tells Peter that the overseer, Jim Facile, keeps a lot of feral dogs around the place, and he is always ready to send them after any slave who tries to run away. He surrounds himself with two men, Harrington and Knowles, who were bought as slaves, but he chose them to be part of the guards because of their hunting skills. Once somebody is discovered attempting to flee, Facile uses the heated metal to brand him on the face. One nightfall, John, a slave who had attempted to flee during the day, is chained and thrown inside the cage. Because of the fresh wounds on his cheek, Thomas gets frightened and starts to shake in terror. Peter tries to reassure him that God will save them, reminding him of his loved ones and telling him to see this as just work because it will come to pass. John laughs at them because it is obvious to him that there is no God who cares about them. However, Peter doesn't respond to jeers. He continues to calm Thomas and promises to pray for John. The next day, Peter overhears two white guards discussing some crucial news. Lincoln has liberated the slaves, and now they're fleeing from their masters, heading to Baton Rouge to get rescued by the Union Army. Peter comes in defense for Thomas when one guard wants to beat him. Peter tells him that he's just a kid. The white guard hits him first before he draws his gun at Peter to finish him off, but Facile stops him because he's the only blacksmith he has. Later, when Peter is back in the cage, Facile approaches to warn him off about pulling stunts and inform him that he's God and Peter is his dog now, to which Peter replies that he should be fed the same meat as the dogs. To show that Facile has not taken it lightly, very early in the morning, Facile enchains Peter and makes him kneel in front of his dog. It keeps barking and growling at Peter, ready to attack him. This makes the dog sniff his scent. Just in case he tries to escape, he will be easily traceable. Moments later, Peter informs the other slaves about Lincoln and Baton Rouge, where the Union Army is stationed, the place that they could reach after a few days of walking through the swamp. But some of the slaves are hesitant because surviving the swamps infested by crocodiles is near to impossible. But when Peter asserts and reminds them that even if they stay, they won't survive this harsh place and the cruel masters, Thomas and a few others agree to escape with him. Now they only need to wait for the right time to execute their escape plan. A slave collapsed and died in the field, and the guards forced Peter to dig the pit and bury him with all the bodies together. Peter takes the shovel to start the burial. In that instant, the guards are distracted by an explosion on the field. Peter uses the shovel to kill them and steals the knife before running away. When other slaves realized it, they used this chance to start running as well, hitting a few guards in the way and allowing John to steal the gun from the dead guard. Facile starts the shooting and kills some of the slaves before they enter the woods. Facile is convinced that Peter is the one who orchestrated this escape plan. He can't let him just go without a fight. Thus, he orders his men, Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs, to go after him. The four slaves, after running for some distance in the woods, eventually they manage to find the swamps. Peter, John, and Thomas are ready to cross through, but one of them becomes shaky and decides to stay back the moment he notices the alligator diving into the waters. This allows the dogs to catch up with him. After the canines have damaged him enough, Facile orders his beasts to back off and demands to know where the group is going, but the slave refuses to respond. Then Facile plays a ruse on him. If he exposes and reveals to him where the group is headed, he promises to grant him an opportunity to leave. A very frightened slave confesses that they're heading to Baton Rouge to meet Lincoln's army and is indeed allowed to go into the swamp. Facile shoots him and lets the crocodiles devour him. After crossing the swamp safely, Peter suggests that they should split up and each take a different path to make it difficult for Fassel and his men to track them down. John takes the horse trail, and Peter advises Thomas to choose his own way through the woods. But Peter reminds him to follow the sound of Union Army cannons. He discovers his leg is bleeding severely because of the swamp leeches, and the blood drips to the plants everywhere he goes. This might complicate his escape because the dogs will smell the blood. He has to do something about it. Peter comes across a house on the plantation owned by a white family that also keeps slaves. Peter ties his wounded leg using a vine to avoid heavy blood loss. He then steals a shirt hanging on the rope before running into the woods again. Unfortunately, he's spotted by a young girl and yells loudly that the slave is running away, causing the alarm to everyone by ringing the bell. Because of the noise, Fassel rides back and follows it to the house. Then he's confidently directed to Peter's whereabouts by the family members. Peter uses the cloth he stole to bandage his wound properly. He takes the blood-stained shirt off and hides in the tree trunk to divert the sniffing dogs. Peter immediately rushes to the swamp, takes a deep breath, and hides under the water. Fassel and his men fall for the trick and make their way down the road, thinking Peter has crossed the swamp. Fassel orders his men to leave the place when he sees the irrigator in the water. Convincingly, it is impossible for a slave to hide in water infested by crocodiles. Peter resurfaces to take a deep breath all of a sudden. The irrigator attacks him and drags him back into the waters, but thanks to the thick branch, he uses it to push it away before stabbing it to death. Fassel and his men continue their chase, where they find a dead crocodile in order to open it up, only to find out it is empty. Which means Peter is the one who killed it and escaped. During the scuffle with the crocodile, Peter got wounded but he lacks medicine to treat his bleeding stomach. He feels more vulnerable, but he motivates himself to keep moving. So he uses the knife to cut the brunch to give him support while walking and as a weapon against wild animals. Fassel splits his group to cover more ground to catch with Peter before reaching Baton Rouge. Peter is lucky to find a treehouse, which has clean water and hot charcoal. Peter uses them to heat up the knife in order to treat his bleeding wound. Peter is starving and needs some food, so he puts the hot coals in the empty bucket and takes them as he climbs the tree where he spotted the beehive. The smoke scares the bees away and allows Peter to take some honey. Fassel sees the smoke in the sky and begins riding towards it. However, Peter finds the canoe and carefully jumps in it and pushes it to sail away while eating honey as food for that day. Back at the plantation, Dodiane, Peter's wife, is informed by her master that she has been sold to the new master, who will take her in a few days. However, her children will not be allowed to go with her because her new master will give her a new husband. To avoid being sold, Dodiane goes to one of the brewing machines used for cotton production. She tells her daughter that this is the only way to stay with her. But Betsy feels it's too much for her to execute because she can't stand watching her mother in pain, but Dodiane asserts and commands her again to do what she has been told to do. The daughter pulls the lever while Dodiane puts her hand inside the machine to injure herself. Peter is aiming to reach where Lincoln's Union Army is stationed. He crosses the river before making his way out into the woods, where he encounters John. That moment, when they hear dogs barking, John becomes angry against Peter because he has exposed his position to Fassel and his dogs. Peter gives John the onions to mask his scent by robbing them on the clothes, but John calls him a lunatic, ignores him, and decides to climb the treetop. While Peter gets inside the empty tree trunk, the dogs manage to sniff John's scent and discover that he was hiding on the tree. Fassel and his men order him to climb down. John refuses, screaming that he's a freeman, not a slave, and immediately Fassel shoots and makes him fall down before demanding information on Peter. Peter watches Fassel touting John while asking Peter's whereabouts. Regardless of the pain, John still won't talk. Fassel decides to cut his head off and give it to Harrington to take it back to camp as a message. When they have left, Peter forces himself out of the tree trunk despite the heavy rain and keeps on wandering through the woods. Suddenly, he sees an abundance of horses running by, including one on fire. Peter walks in the direction they came from and finds a plantation house that's burning, and all the white people are dead. It seems the slaves took matters into their own hands the moment they heard about Lincoln's emancipation news. Cautiously, Peter walks inside the house and slowly walks through the rooms until he comes across a dying kid lying on the floor. Peter immediately lifts her and carries her outside, where he puts her on the table and tries to fetch some water. The girl is scared. She holds Peter's shirt tightly and refuses to be left alone. The kid hands a cross pendant to Peter. He prays for her and tells her that God loves her. At that moment, Harrington tracked him down and ordered him to drop his knife and step away from the girl if he didn't want to get shot. When Peter realized that the girl had died, out of rage he turned around, stabbed Harrington in the throat with the cross, and stole his gun. At that instant, Knowles also arrives at the house, and in his haste, Peter uses the stolen weapon to shoot him dead. Hearing the barking dogs approach, Peter realizes that Fassel is close. He then decides to run into the plantation fields for cover. When Fassel arrives at the scene, he becomes more outraged after realizing how Peter has mercilessly killed his bodyguards. Then he charges to hunt him down before he crosses. One of his dogs managed to catch up to Peter, but he shot it down to continue his journey. The next morning, Peter arrives at the beach filled with white people's dead bodies in their uniforms. And in the distance, Peter can see ships and hear cannons that indicate that the Union Army is very near. Excited, Peter begins to run towards them in order to get saved, but suddenly Fassel overtakes him and whips him to the ground. Mockingly, Fassel offers Peter some of the meat and orders him to beg for it like a dog, which Peter refuses. Fassel draws his gun to him and threatens to shoot him dead while reminding him once more that he is his god. Lucky enough, Lincoln's men shoot him dead before he can pull the trigger. Lieutenant Andre, the platoon leader of the Union Army, saves Peter and takes him to their camp in Baton Rouge for medication. After a few days of resting, Peter is feeling better and believes that he's free. He asked for his papers as a freeman so that he could search for his family. Unfortunately, he isn't allowed to leave yet. Instead, he is given the choice by the Army general whether to work on the government farms and get paid or join the Army to fight the Confederacy. Peter initially refuses, but when the general points out that joining the Army can help him rescue his family and be free for good, Peter chooses the second option and enlists as a Union soldier to fight for his family's freedom. Before they leave for the battle, Lieutenant Andre approaches Peter and asks him to help the cause, only to pose and get photographed. Peter agrees to show his bare back to the camera, exposing the scars of hundreds and hundreds of whippings. This turned out to be the iconic photograph that shows the cruelty and reality behind slavery. Moments later, Peter assists the Army by revealing all the intel about the railroad and the big cannons in Confederate majority states, which are ready to be used against whoever comes across their line of sight. At dawn, Lieutenant Andre takes Peter and all his men to the battlefield. Without any seconds to wait, they start shooting at the enemy, but they're facing massive, devastating blows from the big cannons of the Confederates. The battle appears to be turning against them, and many Union soldiers are falling, including Lieutenant Andre, before Peter's eyes. This motivates Peter, and he decides to take the charge. He orders them to attack the enemy's strategic positions to stop and get rid of the cannons, and thanks to all the soldiers that see him as an inspiration and follow him, eventually the Union Army overpowers the Confederate soldiers and obtains their victory. After the battle, the Army visits the plantations to spread the good news and free the slaves. When they arrive at the cotton plantation where Peter used to work, Peter sees his former master die after refusing to be taken as a prisoner. Peter begins searching everywhere for his family, almost having a breakdown when he can't find them. He starts to pray to God to guide him. From a distance, he spots his wife, and the kids are also looking for him. Peter runs and hugs them, sharing the tearful family reunion. The photograph of the real Peter became an iconic part of history and traveled the entire world many times over. Thanks for watching, but don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications to watch more of my videos. Have a good day.